So the official definition of typography. I mean, look at this. The design or selection of letter forms to be organized into words and sentences to be disposed in blocks of type, as printing up on a page. Typography and the typographer who practices. It may also be concerned with the other related matters: the selection of paper, the choice of ink, the method of printing, the design of the binding, if the product at hand is a book. But the word typography without modifier usually denotes the activities and concerns of those most involved in and concerned with the determination of the appearance of the printed page. Can you imagine? Like nobody's ever gonna remember that, right? Um, so let me take you to this video first.
Typefaces aren't merely about forms, they're about design systems. They have to do with the way things relate to one another.
It's the joy of what happens with color and form and information.
Fonts are clothes in a sense. They help visually externalize your identity to the world.
It's about tension, it's about spatial arrangement, it's about the texture, and it's about the dynamics.
Typefaces are not toys. They're tools. They're designed to solve problems. Some people say that there are two kinds of type designers. There are those whose voice is always detectable in the work they do, and those whose voice is never detectable in the work they do. Tobias and I try to conceal our handiwork in typefaces. I would love people to recognize our work, to respond to it in an emotional way, but again, for it to play second fiddle to the message.
A lot of the conversations that we have would sound kind of bizarre. We're trying to figure out, like, what is the gray flannel suit version of this form?
It's like, this is too Tom and Jerry. It needs to be more Don Draper. It's
like, and we don't even see exactly what we're talking about. It's like, oh, yeah, you're right.
Letters are everywhere, and that's one of the things that makes typography so interesting to people these days.
It's such a pervasive part of our day. You need type again and again and again to get through the day, to live your life.
I landed in the music industry in the 70s. It was completely lucky. I loved record covers. I thought there was no object more wonderful than a record cover. The albums that people would know were things like Bruce Springsteen, Darkness at the Edge of Town, or the Boston album. But I was more interested in typography. So I used to experiment with typography on jazz albums. I determine how I design something based on the audience and what the audience will bear. Evoke the response you want while pushing the audience to see something perhaps in a new way. My goal when I started designing for the public theater was to create a visual language as opposed to a logo for a theater. And Bring in the Noise, Bring in the Funk was the best use of that visual language because it used this wood type in a very provocative way. It was type that talked to you, it was type that rapped, it was type that tapped. It's the only Broadway show that didn't have a logo. Everything is about identity. Everything is about expressing individuality of places, businesses, organizations, people. I think the ultimate goal is to have as much uniqueness and understanding in every communication that you can have.
Quite weirdly, I always think typography is a little bit like carpet. I kind of look at it from the point of view of texture and how readable that texture actually is. One of our clients is Studio Museum in Harlem. I had thought about Invisible Man. He talks about the sense of identity as an African American and being black, the idea of being noticed and unnoticed. What we did was create a form similar to a stealth bomber. I took some text and I applied it to a paper format, utilizing optical illusion, and that's how stealth became whole. It's not a normal poster which is flat. It's very sculptural. UCLA came to me and asked us to look at their poster series. We utilized their standard font, and we used Fedora, and manipulated them through code into regular dynamic structures which were still fonts. You need attractors. Too much text. There's not enough textual form and tension, dynamics. And so when you see a poster that is entirely different to other posters that you see around you, then you're going to be attracted to it, either whether you hate it or you like it. And it's basically doing its job.
If you look back 200 years, infographics were being used to map cholera cases in London. Fast forward, you have magazines like Wired putting an emphasis on infographics. Wired influences publications like Good, who take this online. So the Opportunity Gap is a piece that we did for Good magazine. It's really ultimately about education. It's about how poverty rates and access to healthcare creates a discrepancy in the opportunities available to students of different races. And the most challenging part of working on an infographic is taking all of the available data and deciding what is the most important bit of information that we need to communicate. Infographics are just about the typography getting out of the way of the message.
Our process is to be able to distill the information to a very key point. You try to be as expressive as you can possibly be with the limitations you have.
Infographics are like pop science. It's fun, it's interesting, it's absorbing.
Because of the computer, people are really aware of typography like they've never been before.
Typography is kind of finally free on the web.
It's amazing that everybody can do this. The tools are there. They're on your phone, which is extraordinary.
It's just something that should be enjoyed.
Words have meaning and type has spirit, and the combination is spectacular.
I love that little video. What do you guys think? Pretty cool, right? Oops. There we go. Okay. So then, as you guys figure, typography is everywhere. It's like, I don't think we just get so acclimated on just kind of taking things for granted. But as an example, like you're driving, like when you drive down the highway, or if you notice, no matter what city you're in, all that font is the same. So there is a font for the highway. Okay, and if you notice, when you are, and you probably don't pay attention to this, but they did several tests to find out which font will be more easy to read, especially when you have to look at something from a distance. But also the kerning, remember we talked the kerning was the space between each letter? So then what happens is a little bit separated. So when you're driving down the road and you look up, right, and you find the name of you're looking at the signs, it looks just right to you. But I can guarantee you, if you got one underneath one of those signs, not moving, you would be able to space it out. It would be a lot spread. The kerning would be really open because it actually makes it easier to read. Also, when you're moving, and they measure the distance and everything else, and that is the exact same font that is used all over the country. Also, if you notice that it's a sans serif font, because it's easier to read, and it's not completely thin. It's not bold, but it's kind of like right in between. So there are so many things that you need to take into consideration. I've always said, there's a bunch of, especially around this area, there's a bunch of like juice bars, especially like your good old, they kind of remind me back of when I was little and growing up in Mexico City. It's like a juice bar, nothing to it. The fruit is fresh. It's like it's affordable, it's good, it's whatever it is. Then you just love going there. But if you look at somewhere like Nectar, are you guys familiar with Nectar? I'll show you that in a minute. Nectar is a place that is also a juice bar. It's expensive, but it has branding. It has a look, and it makes everything different. And so what I've always said is like, I feel like Hispanics are really great at like running a business. They're not so great sometimes at marketing because they relied a lot on word of mouth, which is awesome. But they don't give their stuff a look. They don't give their stuff branding. Or like the logos are just really busy. They're nothing unique. And what she was talking about is like, how do you make it more interesting? I love that the guy say, Thank you. I love that the guy said it's like fonts are tools. They're communication tools. So you gotta really think about that. Even when you're just sitting at a movie theater waiting for a movie to start, like watch even the ads. Just kind of start paying attention to that and start paying attention like to the opening credits of even other movies. I mean, I always found that fascinating. So here's an example of it. These are not from actual students. These are all examples that I found on the internet. But I love the simplicity of this. Go out and vote. It's not swaying you one way or the other, right? It just telling you like, go out there and do it, right? It says vote here. This is the headline. I love how they use this part of the for the O. And then they have November 8, 2016, and then I don't, back then I don't know. I've never seen this hashtag, but obviously it meant something. But don't boo and go vote. Straight to the point. Very simple type. Sans serif. Do you guys see that? Bold. Not overly huge. When we're younger designers, we tend to do really large typography sometimes, and we don't really kind of need to do that. And get the point across. Okay, I'm fascinated by this. I've never tried doing one of these, but you guys know who this is, right? And it looks just like him, doesn't it? It looks just like Heath. But, I mean, look at how cool. Okay, then, this is, so like music posters, they have to do with who the band is. They have to do with what venue they're going to be at. They have to be with the target audience. So if let's say like Michael Bublé as an example, which I love, by the way. I don't know if like the girls probably like him here, but your audience is mostly women, right? Unlike Michael Bublé, would you say? I mean, how many guys in here? There's only 2 of you today. And it's like, how many guys in here are like Michael Bublé? I mean, he's decent, but like, would you actually consider going to a concert? Probably not. If you're dating somebody that really likes him, then you would probably go, okay, they like to do it, right? I'm gonna take him for their birthday. Totally different experience, right? So you kind of think about who your target audience is, and this one of the most fascinating stories many years ago. You guys know who Barry Manilow is? Copacabana. He sings that. Okay, so I went to the concert. My friends were like, I'm like, okay, fine, let's just go. I'm sure it'll be fun. I was going with my girlfriends. Fascinated about what was I seeing. This is 1997. Okay, that was the first time. I saw him 2 times after that, believe it. That's not only was he a great entertainer, but you know what? He was so engaging. And women, I'm telling you, there was a guy that was literally reading the paper waiting for the show to start, and his wife was sitting on the edge like this. I'm like, you're really excited, aren't you? And she goes, oh, I go to all of his concerts. I follow him around the country. And the husband he was like literally reading the paper. But then the show started, and this is this is 97, so think about technology wise. So it's what, 25 years ago. No. He had on all his albums up on a screen, and he said, okay, like he would give somebody like this remote and say, okay, well, you pick it, So, let's hear from this. And the people, his friends really knew him. So they picked up from our album, and he would sing the songs from that, whatever the album was. And talk about marketing, okay? I thought it was really smart back then. And then in the intermission, they had like the Barry Manilow credit card. And I was just hysterical. I was so tickled by it because I'm like, oh, look at that. Like, put it on my Barry. Like, Barry will pay for it. right? And there was a line. I mean, women were signing up for the Barry Manilow credit card. I mean, I'm talking a huge line. And I was like, like it really blew me away. I mean, yes, I have to admit the concert was phenomenal, and that's why I went and saw it 2 more times after that. You know, but it was everything how it was done very simplistic and very straight to the point. I'm like, this guy knows marketing. So imagine this, like if you're thinking of Barry Manilow, you probably wouldn't use a type style like this, right? Because this doesn't, you don't think of Barry Manilow like this. Like, what do you think of? I don't know this people right here. But maybe the blues, maybe something along those lines, right? Something older. I mean, I like that this kind of looks like a ticket a little bit. Yeah, exactly. Like how they and look how they organize the information. Is remember that is. I mean, typography is part of graphic design, and it's about coming up with a solution. So this is what it is, which is a party, right? Here's who's presenting it. Here's who's performing. Notice the size of the type in here. You have a little bit more leeway on the name of the party or the logo of the band, whoever's, because of who they are. But here you go with, even though the fonts are smaller, obviously, I'm assuming, obviously these are the most important singers, right? Performers. And then these people are coming right after them. And like you can tell that by the size of the type. Right? It's very important that you see the difference. And then you organize it October 15th. Here the doors open at 8, where it is, and then here is the website and the Facebook. So it is, but I can guarantee you that up with something like this, you have to know the venue, you have to know the band, you have to know the target audience. Like, you would probably not do, I could be wrong because I've never been, but based on what I know about like Coachella, this probably wouldn't be the look for Coachella, right? That's Coachella reminds me of like I watched this movie a zillion years ago called Mad Max. You ever see it with Tina Turner? I feel like that's what Coachella reminds me of. Like, out in the desert, people are, it's.
There's actually a festival that's like that. It's out in the desert, but it's not Coachella. It's private.
See?
It's hard to get tickets though.
See what I'm talking about? So you would not. So you really have to know your audience. It's not about choosing type for the sake of choosing type. Okay, then this is one of my favorite posters. Good typography is. What does it say?
Bad typography is everywhere.
No, the one underneath. The good typography is.
That's right. Bad typography is
But that is bad typography is everywhere.
Will these work?
Thank you. Yes.
They don't have the little brads in them, but they have the pockets. That's all they had up there. I took the last one.
Okay. Thank you so much.
So if those work, then I'll send it over to.
Okay. I'll make it work. Thank you. So, what does it say? Can anybody read that?
I don't know what the last one.
Good typography is. Oh, good typography is invisible. Bad typography is everywhere. So, sorry to say. And it is true. Like, one of my best examples of bad type would be, and I'll give you all the Las Vegas as an example. Have any of you been? Again, you guys maybe too young to go. People love Vegas. I hate Vegas. I love it at night because I think it looks beautiful and it's mesmerizing and the shows are great and everything looks like it's right there, but it's really like 10 miles away. But in the daytime, like you see all of the ugly, like the city smells. There's people that had way too much fun that are like in the street. They don't even know how they got there. But what they're doing, they're handing you flyers constantly. You know what I'm talking about. They're handing you flyers constantly, like trying to promote you to go to a show or anything. And there's just a lot of bad. Like they love gradients. They love, if you pay attention, they love just like really bright colors. The more text a piece of paper has, I worked for a guy like that. That he goes, okay, if I'm going to spend that much money redesigning the packaging, I need to fill it up with information. No, no, you don't, because you are. You know, have you ever look at something when there's like you don't even know where to look, like it's so confusing, or also when, or how about this, when you have this beautiful wedding invitation or this beautiful birthday invitation, not online, like an actual invitation, and you look at it and like the date's missing, or the time's missing, or the RSVP phone number missing. Imagine that. How upsetting is that? You spend all this money, right, on all this money on something beautiful, and then it didn't serve its purpose. So you always is good to like make yourself a checklist. But it's true to say that good typography is invincible because like we are attracted to pretty things, pretty type, pretty people, pretty furniture, pretty anything. I don't know, especially creative people. Would you agree or disagree in how you live your life a little bit, right? It's like you just said there's certain things like we don't want to live in a house that is just a house. We want to put our touch in it. Like if you, I don't know about you guys, but if I go buy a pot for a plant, it's not just buying a pot. It could take me a long time to find the right pot. Are you guys the same?
Yes.
Yeah, and this is a difference of, I know everybody's creative in his own mind, but we're in a different place. We're a different breed. Like people go, oh, I'm creative too. Yeah, okay, great. And then you go to your house and their house and everything's brown. I mean, you know what I'm talking to? Like those people. Like I hate to say it, my sister's house is all brown. Like everything's brown, and I'm like. And the furniture looks like my grandmother had it, and it's not. Like she bought things at Thomasville. Does anybody know what Thomasville was? I don't think they're in business anymore. And I just found Thomasville to be so boring. I mean, it doesn't have to be like so over the top like the Jetsons that things are uncomfortable, but it needs to have like, you know, like the people that go to the pottery barn. Pottery barn is beautiful, but then they buy the whole room. Like, and then you go to their house and like, oh, you got this at the pottery barn. You know, and like I hate when people like. So I don't mind, but it was like, yeah, like that's a lamp. I saw that lamp. I saw that table. I saw even the fake trees from the pottery barn, right? But instead it's cool when you're like, oh, I love your couch, and they go, I got it at the pottery barn. You did? That does not look like a pottery barn couch. Because of how you put it together. Have you guys thought about this? It's like, I mean, so it takes me a long time to buy something, like something of substance, because it has to be suiting to my eye. It's like, you know, my husband has no taste, right? You know, that's another story for another day. But I'm telling you, okay? So anyway, so you see the difference in this poster between serif and sans serif. It's like, you know, they bevel this type on it. They put a drop shadow. And then when they put the bad typography, it's just flat and bold and serif and sans serif. So I love this poster. Type's universal, like they were saying. So this is remember that typography has to communicate what you're selling. In somebody like Nike, Coca-Cola, in any of these brands, okay, things are a little bit different because they've been around for a long time. Okay, and then, so they can get away with things that other brands can get. Like, do you know, like the Nike swoosh? I think somebody did that logo for like $500, like back in the day. You hear the story? Somebody like Googled that or not. It's like, and I don't think the lady, or she didn't get paid for it, or she got like $500. I mean, something along, or isn't that insane? And you cannot, if you put a little check mark on another logo, you cannot call it a swoosh because, like, obviously people call it a swoosh, but they don't. You're not supposed to, like, out. Let's say you're doing out in the open, because Nike has trademarked the word swoosh. But one of the things that I do like about this poster, again, this is like he's probably somebody famous. I don't know. Do you guys follow basketball? He looks like he's famous, and he looks like he's super tall, right? But look at the drop shadow, and this obviously he's running, but the drop shadow gives it some movement. But I love how they place the type bounce. Obviously he's got the basketball, and it's like, and they made it even more dimensional by putting some forward and some back, in the foreground and in the background. It makes it interesting. And look again, one of the things that I need to look at the size. This is the main thing. Bounce for days is the second, and then here there's like Hyperdunk 2016. Very clean, very, it's like just keep it right. I love it when we are able to design something like this. I love doing this stuff. I don't do it all the time. Not every design works for this, but I love it when it runs into the edge here. So like this is the edge of the paper, and I probably gave it like about an inch on the sides, and probably maybe an inch and a half, no, an inch and a quarter, top and bottom. And then they put this black box, and they have the type running into the edge. But you notice how it's perfectly sitting. They made the baseline the top of the letters, and the spacing in here, and then also they flushed it left, and then the kerning is just perfection. Is it easy to read? It's very clean, right? This kind of stuff I love. I struggle with serif fonts because nothing, just my personal opinion, I feel like sometimes they can make things look dated. And I think I'm traumatized because when I was working at this company called, it's like Bristol, it don't even exist anymore. They had some Holiday Inns, and they had some hotels here in Dallas. And I love this creative director that I had, and he was giving me awesome work. And you always want to have work that you can put in your portfolio. Well, as the company grew, he got promoted, and he was given like the coolest and like the most luxurious properties. So he got another team, and they put the most experienced designers in that team. Then they brought in this lady, Maria. And Maria did not like me. I don't know why. Maybe because she didn't love my beautiful personality. I have no idea. But Maria only gave me coupons. Like like back in the day, like like sometimes like in some now pretty much they have all this. A lot of the hotels have there's free breakfast included type of thing. But back in the day, like to growing centers at the Holiday Inn, they're like, okay. So for after 12 stays, you'll get a free breakfast, and they will do little coupons like a punch. Not old school, nothing digital. I mean, it was bad. That's all I was doing. After doing all this cool stuff and really cool elevator signs and all that, then I was doing coupons, and I just thought, wow. So then she thought she wanted to have a creative meeting. And she wanted us to bring examples of what we thought it was good typography. I'm telling you what, that was like, I'm done. She showed us the cover of Time magazine. You've seen the cover of Time magazine. Don't look at the picture, just look at the cover of Time magazine. It's just a big Time, right? Nothing to it. It's old school. Probably, I always think that it's like Time for a long time. I thought it's like Oh, it's pretty much for older men to read because the editorial, the way it was set up, is like in 3 columns, like a newspaper, just black and white text. But she would open it up and she would say, "This is a good example of typography." And I remember going to the other creative director and I'm like, she showed us time as an inspiration. So I think from that time, it kind of traumatized me a little bit with serif fonts. But there are some serif fonts which are gorgeous, like this. Like I mean, I want to call it rosé, but it's not. This is rose. Look at the R in here. I mean, look at how gorgeous this is. And I love how it was, and how the script complements each other. And I guarantee you that maybe on this one, they probably created outlines in Illustrator and then pull this down to make it set because you have to find the right place. Like, look at the size of this. I mean, this is, I don't know about you guys, but would you consider this beautiful and very suiting to the eye? Look at the size. Again, look at the kerning. It's perfectly placed. And I don't know if this is font. I think there's a famous designer that actually has done this type of type. So I don't know if this is a type now, but very easy. They probably pull the R down again where they created outlines and pulled this out to make it work. And then in here, they went, this is a perfect example of how to make a paragraph look exciting. They made all caps on the name. They use italics, and then they use this is probably like a regular Garamond or Times font, but it doesn't matter. It works. You see it? This is the priority here, what you want them to see first, and then you want them to read this. And I love the combination of the largest font size, the all caps, the italic, very nice and clean and easy to read. So you guys are getting the idea of how, if somebody gives you a paragraph, you really have to think about how you're going to make it work. What's priority in that information? Okay, another one of my favorite posters. I can't get over this. I think it's fantastic. So you guys have any idea how they maybe accomplish this? So it's obviously some kind of exhibit, right? Would you guys say? It's some kind of exhibit, right? And so once I got the exhibit, they probably did all this research to find out exactly what the exhibit was going to be about. And so what they did, obviously they found a font that worked. Again, they went with a sans serif. They went with something bolder. They went with all caps. And they would probably, once they knew, I bet you they got this inspiration from what the actual exhibit was about. I'm almost sure that that's where it came from. So what the way they accomplished this was, again, they did it in Illustrator, okay, and then they created outlines, and then they added a pathfinder, right? Or they went in there with different points, and then they started. And then they went in and deleted the extra pieces, and until of course it goes from nothing to 100%. Very cool, right? And easy. You guys would consider easy to read. Okay, and then look at what's happening down here. So they got a little closer to the edge, but I can guarantee you that this is at least 1/4 of an inch. So you always want to do at least 1/4 of an inch. Again, the exception to the rule, right? You can run things to the edge. So do you guys know when you bring something to the edge like this, like the black, what is that called? Yeah, I was looking at you. I was looking at you for sure. So yes, exactly. So when you bring something to the edge, it's called a bleed. Okay, so what happens here, if you were, they probably did it it could have done it two things. They did it in Illustrator and maybe laid out the rest of it in Illustrator, but more than likely what they did, they created this in Illustrator, and then they brought they created a document in InDesign. They brought this in as a picture and then laid out everything else in InDesign. But see, this is I think right here they probably did at least 1/8 of an inch. So you don't want to get too close to the edge of information like this, because what happens when the printer's cutting paper, things can shift. Like imagine what happens when you know, kind of like when you grab your scissors and you cut 4 pieces together instead of one, and you know how the sheets shift. That's what happens when a blade comes through. So you want to keep that information inside the poster, and same thing as the other posters. So they did Art Research Days. They did the date because that's what's important. I can't something about 2016 here. They did obviously the website. This is probably some kind of disclaimer that they probably did like a size 7 or so, that people don't really need to read it, but it needs to be there type of thing. And then sponsored logo here or wherever it's showing right there. So you give the name of the exhibit a priority, and then you work your eye through that. Oh, I want to go. I want to see that. Where is it? And here's the info. And then you're like, oh, okay, so I can go to the website and check it out for tickets. Whatever it is. And this is all, you notice, this is one font, same font here. This is a little too far, so I can't tell. So I don't think it's the same font there. Another one that's really interesting. Another one that was accomplished in Illustrator, because they went in and took like the crossbar on the A here to make it more interesting. But I mean, this looks like this could be Helvetica, by the way. All the same size. The placement of here. Again, this bled to the edge, right? Because it made sense. And I can guarantee you, when you bleed to the edge, they probably have at least 1/4 of an inch up here. So again, so when the blade comes, there's not that white space between the black and the edge of the paper. I find this to be so fun. So the information in the background, it's important, but it's not really important. And it's all in Spanish. But look at this typography treatment on here. It's probably at one of those fonts that you don't get to use very often, that you know they kind of has to, it kind of has to look like you wrote it down, you know, but it's not a completely a handwritten font. It kind of reminds me, do you remember like in the, especially like the Hispanic grocery stores, when they put stuff in the window, you know, they put that, somebody has this type style, right? That kind of reminds me of this style, but look, they bled it to the edge again, especially here on the edges and the top of this just was barely a little bit. The bottom, they went with different sizes, you know, like make good things. It is still bold, but you know, this is one size and this is one size to make it work. And actually, this is a little smaller than this to make everything work and make it justified. So this, when you have type from end to end, is called justified. Okay? If you have type that sits on the left-hand side, it's called left justified. If you have type that sits on the right-hand side, it's called right justified. And then, of course, you have like your center. So here is an example of left justified. You can see where it's sitting. And then if this was completely justified, you know, when this will be like, you can see the imaginary line here and an imaginary right line on the right, but then you will have to deal with spaces, right, that could cause rivers. So you kind of keep that in mind. Great contrast of color, and then they went in as they're laying this out. More than likely, this was probably done in either InDesign or Photoshop, and then they went in and took they took the transparency down, not the opacity of the color. They left the color at 100% and took the transparency down, and that's why you see that you see the blue coming through that red, and the red not changing color. Remember, there's a difference between taking down the opacity versus the transparency. The opacity is, so if you have, let's say you have this red, let's say it's 100% red. If you take the opacity down to like 50%, it looks more pink, right? But if you take the transparency, it's just about making something, because if you take the opacity down, you're not going to be able to see it through. You're just going to see it pink. But if you take the transparency down, you're going to be able to see through it and give it this illusion. Any questions on this? Okay. I hope that you find it useful. Okay, it's to get you going. So these are, even though you're working on your ransom note, I think you're gonna apply some of these things to it. It's like I'm just really excited to see what you guys are doing. So that's the lecture for today. And I'm gonna do another lecture on Wednesday. Sorry, I still don't have, I have my days all messed up. And